Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you back to Government House, and in one instance, to welcome you for the first time, Ms. Tudor, to speak about the outcome of the 16th Conference of Governors General and Presidents held here last week. And I thought that I should come back and indicate what the issues were that were discussed that created some momentum in terms of the conference. First of all, I should say that it was a very successful conference. I think most of the States of the Union addresses start after the State of the Union is good. So, in the similar fashion, I'm saying that the conference was very successful. I've had very commendatory telephone calls from my colleagues who have said that they really enjoyed the stay, and some of them have also written that. I'll just, for the record, outline the persons who were present. The Governor General of Antigua and Barbuda, Sir Rodney Williams, the Governor General of Belize, Sir Colville Young, the President of the Commonwealth of Dominica, His Excellency Charles Savrin, the Governor General of Grenada, Her Excellency Dame Cecile La Grenade, the Governor of Montserrat, His Excellency Andrew Pierce, the Governor General of Barbados, Her Excellency Dame Sandra Mason, the Governor General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, His Excellency Sir Frederick Ballantyne, the Deputy Governor General of Nevis, Her Honor Mrs. Marjorie Morton, CSM, the recently retired Governor General of St. Lucia, Dame Paulette Louisi, and then we had some special guests, the Right Honorable Sir Dennis Byron, the President of the CCJ, and the Chief Justice of the OECS Supreme Court, Dame Janice Pereira. We had some other persons who came in and made presentations, and I'll tell you about them, but I just thought that you should know the main participants. The sessions began on the Monday, of course, with the travel to Nevis in the morning. Persons had arrived on the Sunday, and then we traveled up to Nevis, docked at the Four Seasons dock, and went off to places of interest with a guided tour by Mr. Leonard Stapleton. And it was a very interesting tour. We then departed, had lunch in Nevis at Nisbet Plantation Inn. The Premier of Nevis and ministers of the Nevis Island Administration attended. And we came back from Nevis in time to rest and then to prepare for the afternoon ceremony, the opening ceremony at Government House. And you, of course, would have heard about that. And I think ZIZ has broadcast that several times. The next day started, this is the Tuesday, would have started the sessions, the conference sessions. And of course, the theme for the conference was Challenges of a Changing Caribbean. And so we needed to put this into context. So I started the business session by giving some opening remarks, and then we had an interactive discussion on the theme. Some of the things that came up as challenges of a changing Caribbean included climate change, drugs, crime, and the impact on youth, Brexit's impact on regional trade, the cost of telecommunications, especially within the region, and the cost and inconveniences of regional air travel. And we discussed these, we exchanged views on these issues. We then had a special presentation by Mrs. Cheryl Seeley Bell, who is the chairman of the Royal Commonwealth Society Barbados branch and the regional coordinator for the society. And she came to be able to enlighten us on the process to be engaged in, to be able to set up our own Royal Commonwealth Society branches. And so several of us who have not only Barbados and Jamaica in the region have branches, but we are all interested in following up and trying to establish a branch here. She also had with her the Deputy Commissioner of the British High Commission in Barbados, and he offered support in terms of the establishment. Now, some of the things, for example, that have been promoted by the Barbados branch have been very informative in terms of being able to have a rally and to speak about Commonwealth issues so that persons would know of the 53 countries that are presently part of the Commonwealth. We know that the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs are presently in England just wrapping up the 2018 CHOGM, Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. But, for example, the Queen's canopy. Persons are becoming increasingly environmentally conscious. And remember when Prince Harry came, he dedicated the canopy here in St. Kitts and Nevis, which was the one out facing Brimstone Hill, the hillside, that's been designated as a preserved site. And so we were able to fill her in that St. Kitts and Nevis had the canopy. We've also looked at the question about the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. How does that interact with the Royal Commonwealth Societies? And the question of fundraising, because all of these societies are independent bodies. They're not getting funds from any organization. We then turned to climate change, and we had very interesting updates from Antigua and Barbuda and from Dominica. And we got updates in terms of the status of their recovery. We got the benefit of a speech that had been given by the Prime Minister of Dominica just the day before, and so that gave us some immediate insight. But the President of Dominica gave us a full detailed presentation on the process and also the resilience measures that were being put into place. The question about building back better. Grenada has had the experience from the Hurricane Ivan, and they've prepared manuals that they will share with us. Barbados emphasized the question of, for example, sea transportation, because we feel that if you hark back to the days of the federal boats, they enhanced sea transportation. They were before the time of some persons here present, but they did present a means of transportation that facilitated students, that facilitated persons, and it promoted integration. And we're feeling that integration cannot be promoted unless you have the interaction of peoples. So that's something that we're looking at. We then had a presentation from High Commissioner of St. Kitts and Nevis in the UK, Dr. Kevin Isaac. And this was very informative because besides telling us about the work of the High Commission, he also was able to update us on something that is presently in the news, which is the matter of the persons in the UK who have been deemed illegal, and Windrush, the Windrush persons. And I was indicating that I think persons may just hear about Windrush but not recognize and appreciate that that was the name of the vessel that in the post-war situation, transported so many of our nationals to the UK. And they contributed over the years. They've been faithful taxpayers and so on. And now, because of a lack of documentation, they are being given some difficulty. So the High Commissioner, who was leading the efforts to assist nationals and also Caribbean nationals, he was heading the group of High Commissioners. And so he was able to give an upfront, close explanation of what the issues were. And we were able to tell him certain modes of approaching, like Parliament, which in fact happened. And some of us saw a very animated and I thought, forceful presentation by the MP for Tottenham, the Right Honourable Lammy, who in fact had succeeded Bernie Grant in that seat. And so, he came through, and he's of Caribbean descent, and so he was able to come in and to give quite a forceful presentation that was persuasive to the Home Secretary, and subsequently the Prime Minister intervened, the Prime Minister of the UK, Ms. Theresa May, Mrs., and she was able to give assurances and to apologize for the agony that had been put to the nationals. And so hopefully, and Dr. Harris has spoken about it, and so hopefully that is the start of a resolution of the issues, and persons may have to be compensated and so on. But it was instructive that the High Commissioner was able to present to us, and we were able to interact in that early setting, and then for it to transpire that it became a big issue, you know, and for it to command the national stage and the international stage. We spoke about protocols that affect, say, the demise of heads of state and so on. And there was a manual that the former Governor General of St. Lucia had prepared, and that suggested that certain relevant protocols and treatment of heads of state in the UK. There were some issues that sometimes heads of state who are representatives of the Queen visiting the UK may have some difficulty in terms of their reception, because there are some restrictions that are imposed on nationals of that particular country. We think about Jamaica, the requirement of visas, and somebody may seek to impose that on the head of state who is actually visiting and is the representative of the Queen. So all of those issues we discussed and, you know, showed how nonsensical they really were. We then had a presentation in the afternoon by Dame Janice Pereira, Chief Justice, who told us about the 50th anniversary of the court, its origins, the strengths, the weaknesses of the court, the need for perhaps the setting up of a trust fund so that the contributions are dealt with on an equal basis and on a timely basis, because at present it depends on the financial circumstances of each country. And so we supported that. Somebody raised the question about why are election petitions delayed, because we think that should be something that should be dealt with promptly. And the Chief Justice herself reflected on that. There ought not to be any delays. The question of use of technology in court proceedings, all of that. So we had a useful first day. Then the second day, we went on to the University of the West Indies, which is also celebrating an anniversary, the 70th year of the university. It was established in 1948. And they had several presentations, some by video and some other presentations in person by Mrs. Sarah Owen and Mrs. Cicely Jacobs from our own open campus. The question of a diary for the year. There is, in fact, in circulation a diary, and persons who especially are graduates of the university, alumni, are being encouraged to participate fully. We here in St. Kitts and Nevis will be having another celebration of UWI Giving Day, which is going to be the 1st of August. Our date has been set for the 1st of August. So we'll combine it with a celebration of emancipation and also the question about giving to the university. So I will be having an activity here at Government House for that day. The question about communicating with alumni so that you can get them involved, because we have so many alumni, whether you have significant numbers here at the Central Bank, you have them at all regional institutions, yet you're not getting them in a committed state to the University of the West Indies. Whereas for other universities, you tend to find that they keep in touch very readily and they're able to have the outreach and to get support for their activities. Then there was a special issue raised by the Governor General of St. Vincent, who wanted to remind us about an initiative which is the World Pediatric Project that is based in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that has afforded a lot of medical care to a number of our children who have had serious illnesses, and they're able to bring in specialists, and they work closely, I know, with our health services here to be able to provide assistance. Then we had a presentation from the President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Sir Dennis Byron, who was able to tell us about the present status of the court. He demits office in July of this year, after his term of office. He'll be succeeded by Justice Adrian Saunders of St. Vincent of the Grenadines and the Grenadines. But the question about whether we should be moving to adopt the court as our final court of appeal, that is open to all of the jurisdictions having to satisfy their respective constitutional requirements. The question of judgments. 8 judgments had already been done for 2018, compared to 6 in the Privy Council for the period. And we had then too that he was thanked for his service, so we gave a special presentation to him. Then the next issue was de-risking and other emerging issues from the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And that was extremely comprehensive, and it made everybody aware of the work of the bank and the issues that surround de-risking. And so we again supported the efforts of the bank and all of the other things that are coming up. He spoke about bank fees and charges, cryptocurrencies, initial coin offerings, cybersecurity. All of those are things that we hear about, but they are very real in our region. We also asked him about air and sea transport that had been raised at our discussion the day before. And the ECCB had, of course, pioneered a company to start a service by sea, but it had not received the necessary support, so they're going to put it back outside and see if they could meet that for intra-regional travel. They inquired about the question about monetary regulation, and then we ended that session because Minister Farrakhan, who was visiting at the time, came into the session he was invited in to be able to say thanks for having been invited to the opening ceremony. And he also had sat in on the final presentation, and he very much enjoyed it. And he wished everyone well and congratulated us on working together towards regional integration. Then we went off after lunch to the ICT Center, because I wanted to present them with the view in terms of what St. Kitts and Nevis is doing. And they were very impressed by the presentations. They were able to see what is going on. There's a website that's being worked on for Government House and the Governor General, so that persons could see what goes on. And also the question of robotics, because they've been very successful in terms of in collaboration with CFBC in doing some robotics presentation. Then the final event for that afternoon was a visit to Park Hyatt, because again we wanted to show what our tourism development is like, and they were again very impressed with the hotel development. We ended the evening, of course, in a very relaxed atmosphere at Spratnet, and again they were quite thrilled to see that one would patronize these areas. It was a full house, it was a Wednesday night, and so you had all the music and the locals and the student visitors and so on. So they got a really relaxed and good atmosphere, and fully protected, of course, by the presence of the security services. And I just want to place on record the appreciation that I have for the security services and the role that they played in terms of effectively transporting and getting them around, the heads of state, and they were all very happy. And I'm glad that Superintendent David is here, because he played a key role in the organization, and he was always present to ensure that things went well. And I'd like him to transmit to ACP James, who was overall in charge of the arrangements, the appreciation of everyone, that a successful time was had by everybody. So I know this was the start of it. I just want to introduce, but I'm open for any questions that you may have.
Good day, Jason Davis of ZIZ Broadcasting Corporation. In your opening statement, you mentioned that there were discussions on the Windrush events that are currently unfolding in the UK. I would like to know, what are your thoughts personally on the series of events and how they've taken the spotlight in the media?
Well, I'm happy that they've taken the spotlight, although they ought to have been not having to be brought, if I could put it in that roundabout way. Because I think that the persons who are considered to be the illegal, in quotes, are definitely not illegal. They may be undocumented, and it's not through their fault in some instances, because I see that a report has come out that their cards were destroyed. They were actually dumped. So there are no records of some of them in terms of their entry into the UK. And the stress that this whole matter has caused in terms of some persons being denied medical benefits, some persons being denied the opportunity to travel, some persons who have had their jobs, they've lost jobs. So it's a very serious matter, and I think the UK will have to undertake quite an extensive examination of the issues and provide a resolution. And I think the Prime Ministers have put it very strongly to the Prime Minister of the UK, and she has agreed that a resolution, and a definitive one, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs indicated, must be brought to this issue. So we're totally in support of the position of our nationals.
Well, Philip Tudor of the Democrat newspaper. I wanted to ask about Dame Pereira.
Yes.
Of the Eastern Supreme Court.
Yes.
I wanted to ask about the challenges, but first I know that the Supreme Court announced that she had just been appointed to the Middle Temple.
Yes.
So could you please tell us a little about the Middle Temple? And after that, could you please talk about the challenges she spoke about and whether some of those challenges may be acting as hindrance to why we still go to the Privy Council and not totally to the CCJ?
Sure. In terms of her being made a bencher of the Middle Temple, that's an honorary position. I could only speak in relative terms because I'm a graduate of the West Indies, so I didn't go to the Inns of Court in the UK. But it is quite an honor to be made a bencher because that's one of the top positions in the Inns of Court. And it gives you the rank in terms of being able to sit when they have functions at the Inns of Court, and that you are given a place of honor. So most of it, Sir Dennis and all of those are honorary benchers. And it reflects upon which Inn of Court they may have gone to, or even in her case, if she was also a Caribbean graduate, they're giving her an honor. Insofar as the CCJ is concerned, we all have different routes to follow if we wish to join the appellate jurisdiction. Now remember, we are already fully paid up, so there is no additional cost. It's a question of choice. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for example, had a referendum, and it had many issues that had been put forward, and it wasn't agreed. Grenada also had a similar referendum. It was not agreed. But the recently re-elected Prime Minister of Grenada has indicated that he's going back on the issue of the CCJ. I think everybody recognizes that it is inevitable. I have been a personal supporter of the CCJ. I can't give an official position in terms of, the country. But my personal support is with the CCJ because I think it's the way to go. If you look at all of the papers that were prepared over the years, some of them by our very distinguished legal luminaries, they're all in favor of moving to the CCJ as the final appellate court. There can be no Barbados, Belize, Dominica have all gone, and Guyana have all gone to the CCJ. And I think that the gathering of legal minds is just second to none in terms of being able to discharge their duties, the judicial duties, without any favoritism. There's no pressure from any government because it is their working funds are derived from a trust fund that is administered by the court. So all of those issues are taken out of play. So it's an inevitable step that one would have to look at.
Governor General, you may not be able to give an official response, but St. Kitts and Nevis in particular, who has been tardy in going to the CCJ, do you imagine that having gone through an experience of the situation of going to court so many times over the election reforms, having gone through 3 different courts before we finally arrived at the Privy Council, do you believe, unofficially of course, if this had had anything to do with the hesitancy of citizens and perhaps the government to go to the CCJ?
I believe that it may have had, because it's natural. If you have used the process, for example, the Privy Council, and it was effective, and it was seen by all the world because it was telecast. I mean, I didn't think persons had comprehended that the system could work that way, that they could see the matter which was of such constitutional import being dealt with before their very eyes. I remember I was at the airport preparing to leave, and I was anxiously monitoring what the result would be, because it was the day when the judgment was given. And I still go back sometimes because I still have it on my system, that I can look at it and see the deliberations, and you learn such a bit. So it's difficult for one to perhaps move immediately after that experience. But I think that it is nevertheless inevitable. If we look at it in a realistic way, in terms of the cost, it's true that the Privy Council doesn't provide a cost in terms of us having to access it, but there's a cost to the litigant, whereas the litigant can stay in his own jurisdiction. The president of the court gave a demonstration of something that had happened that morning, where a Guyanese litigant was able to stay in Guyana and to have his matter dealt with at the court, by way of or speedy technology. And so we have the same technology here. The CCJ has provided that to the court, and so it's something that could easily be adapted as necessary. So I see it as inevitable. Okay, I'm not saying, well, the government is going to go tomorrow or any time, but in terms of reforms and how everything is moving, it would be an inevitable step.
Les Roy Williams, SKNIS. Sir Tapley, I must congratulate you first on the successful hosting of the conference, and to see that governors general in the region are active in terms of the discussion of the contemporary issues and so on taking place around us. My question, though, is from your discussions, your deliberations, some of the opinions that you proffered, and so on, will that be taken into consideration in terms of passed on to the heads of government and so on?
The whole purpose is that we are put into a singularly unique position as heads of state to advise our governments. I think in my opening address I said that we are not symbolic figures, and that sort of thing, but we are effective advisors. And I gave the run of persons' qualifications. I said that we had reached the acme of our professional endeavors, because you had a former senior Justice of Appeal of Barbados in the person of Dame Sandra Mason, who is now Governor General. You had a renowned cultural exponent in terms of the Governor General of Belize, who has been in office for 25 years. You had other judges. You had even the Governor of Montserrat, who's only been there for 2 months. He has been in a senior position in the British service in terms of security and everything else. You had St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a medical doctor. So all of us have respective, activities that we have been performing. President Savon of Dominica had served in several ministerial positions over the years before he acceded to the office of president, and so on. And Antigua and Barbuda, the same thing. The Governor General of Antigua and Barbuda, he had been a minister in the footsteps of his father. His father had been in the Vieux Board administration, and he initially got in and was Minister of Education. His father has been a Minister of Education, and so on, and works. So that you have that build-up of experience that persons can influence in terms of discussions, and certainly on issues of this nature. I would indicate not that one is going to divulge what one discusses with the Prime Minister, but that certainly issues of import are brought up. I do not hesitate to bring up, because I think it would be wasting my time if I didn't take advantage of the situation and be able to impact in some way. And the Prime Minister, I think, has not been shy about saying that we have been able to discuss and sometimes to impact certain decisions.
Sure. For example, the whole issue of the CCJ,
Yes.
that you're very passionate about, Caribbean countries signing on to the appellate function of the CCJ. However, heads of government may have some reservation. So in this sense, you're not so much the decision maker,
No.
the governors general decision makers, but rather advisors.
Advisors,
Okay.
and hoping to impact upon decisions.
Sure. Okay.
Clive Bacchus, Win FM 98.9. Governor General, thank you once again for the opportunity. And of course, I want to join my colleagues in expressing congratulations on what I thought was a very important meeting in St. Kitts and Nevis. Speaking to the issue of court proceedings, as a member of the media, we are not allowed to record in court. We seldom have photo opportunities in court, and lots of the rulings are not streamed for wider access to those outside of the courtroom. Could you tell us what is the thinking about those procedures? What informed those decisions in the beginning? What are the new realities that may perhaps impact on a potential change? Before I wind up my question, reporters sometimes don't hear clearly from the bench, but if they make a mistake in the reporting, they can be accused of contempt of court. I don't understand why you can't record the proceedings, so if you can help me to understand it, I would really appreciate it.
Certainly. I think it's all rooted in history. The history of the court, we are all former British colonies, and the history of the court was that process was sacrosanct in terms of being able to go into court, even in terms of a lawyer. I have gone to court when I was just an ordinary Queen's Counsel, and unless you're robed, you can't even be said to be seen by the court. And so there was a judge here who would greet me and say to a colleague at the bar, could you inquire from learned Queen's Counsel if there's any matter that he wishes to be brought to the court's attention? I couldn't be recognized in my own right and stand up and say anything because I wasn't gowned. So that we do have that tradition, and that tradition continues. And even though here we have done away with the wig, at least most persons have, in Africa it still is retained with all of the claim of liberation and everything else. The Caribbean, I've never owned a wig. It's about, maybe cost about £300 plus, to purchase. And, I've never had occasion to wear one. And not required, because they were abolished just as I was coming into the system some 40-odd years ago. But just going back to that, I think we are moving through technology. The Caribbean Court of Justice issues some very prompt videos of the proceedings. And the fact that they're broadcast and that there's the interaction now where the litigant can stay in his home country and can appear before the court, I think this is all leading up to opening up the court process so that one would be able to, at least to be able to follow it. Even in the United States of America, in the Supreme Court, you now get a delayed transmission of a case so that you can hear the questions being asked by the members of the court and the responses from the lawyers. In the United States system also, they have a commendable situation whereby each side is given 1 hour to make their presentations. Whereas here, we tend to be at large, and you get some grandstanding sometimes. So all of these things need to be taken into account if one is moving to technology to be able to do. But I think we'll reach there eventually, Mr. Bacchus, that we can have a more open situation. On the question of contempt, I think one should be civil and always responsible in terms of reporting on court proceedings, that you want to be accurate. At the same time, other contempts and, slander and libel, defamation, these are being relaxed because you had criminal processes that in some jurisdictions still obtain, and all of these, I know through your journalistic associations, that you have been pressing for the relaxation and, reform And all of these we still are pretty well behind in terms of a lot of our law reform. And so there's a need for accessibility and for acceleration of the process of law reform. But everything is, of course, parliamentary time and legal draftsman time and everything else. And we have not been able to go as a group to do some group legislation that was perhaps proposed when CARICOM and so on was started, and the OECS legal unit, that you could have some regional uniform legislation, you know, that could be adopted fairly easily in matters of significant legal issues. So all of those sorts of things. But as I say with the CCJ, the government of Grenada says that they're committed to reopening the debate in their jurisdiction.
Seeing there's a gap, nature abhors a vacuum. I'll step in. My second question has to do with building back better,
yes,
and also in the context of building resilience. What are some of the important things said that you that you will perhaps discuss further, and in the context of when we think about resilience and building back, there are opportunities. What is being said about the opportunities? I know we talk a lot about the challenges, but what about the opportunities in the resilience process, in the building back process?
Well, I think, thank you very much, Mr. Backus. I think the question of, for example, building stronger, more effective roofs, because roofs suffered so many times in Dominica, for example, and the question of buildings that were of a more recent vintage were able to withstand some of the winds. But the question is, what do you do with a Category 5? You know, are you prepared to have adequate notice to be able to resist it in terms of, you know, all of the things? And the question that a lot of the public places that, for example, are hurricane shelters were some of the places that were badly damaged. And so you now have to move from the system of automatically thinking, well, a school or a church hall, that you have to now test and see what is the resilience. Can it withstand up to a Category 5, if one can say that? Although perhaps nothing may be able to withstand it. But just to be able to, you know, to see how you can take measures, your building codes, all of these things have to be, so the planning board and development boards have to be now more proactive in terms of reaching out and ensuring that, you know, whether you have to have cisterns, so that if the water goes, you know, what is happening. I mean, yesterday, Puerto Rico had a blackout, total blackout. I mean, is this supposed to happen in this century? You know, if you are now recovering from a hurricane and everything else, you know. So all of these are issues that have to be examined. But it's a lot of the technicians and technical people who have to be on board in terms of doing. So we relying on our technicians within the region and the skilled people to be able to advise the governments.
You mentioned that still some governors general may meet with some difficulty when they go to England. Yeah. Has there been expressed any difficulty that the high commissioners in London would have with their relationship with Buckingham Palace and probably with the government? Because what has not been said is that although the British Prime Minister seems very apologetic and so on, The Guardian reported that initially Downing Street was refusing to meet with the Caribbean heads. So that in itself, to me, may reflect some deeper issues. I don't know.
I think that initially, the initial refusal was because they didn't appreciate the issue. They didn't appreciate the significance and the extent of the problem. And so therefore, they thought that, well, this might just be something that could be cursorily dealt with. Whereas in fact, it's a major problem. Because, and then to see that you destroy the cards. So that, I mean, it gives quite a difficulty. Now, the question of Governors General and the question of the UK, that was raised when I visited. We had a meeting of all the Governors General of all the realms. There are 15 of them in the world, Canada, Australia, so on and so. All of us met at Buckingham Palace under the former Private Secretary, Sir Christopher Gite. It was the first time there'd ever been a business meeting of Governors General. And we raised the issue in terms of issues of difficulty, the reception. There's a cost to being accorded certain VIP facilities at Gatwick or Heathrow. But at the same time, normal courtesies should be extended. I've never had a difficulty. And perhaps it's through the proactivity of the High Commissioner, whom by the way, I must put on the record as commending for his leadership in this Windrush matter, because he was very proactive. And I think the Foreign Minister, Minister Brantley, expressed that commendation also. But I think it's basically to have some coordinated approach. We had to have an abbreviated discussion at the time at the Palace, but it's something that has to be taken up so that persons can have the assurance that they will encounter no difficulty when visiting, because especially that Governors General are representatives of the Queen. And so once you continue to have that situation, there ought not to be a difficulty. Okay.
I do wonder, though, Sir Tapley, if this issue of the Windrush generation is part and parcel of the Brexit ideology, where Britain, of course, wanting to separate from the European Union, is nationalism.
Yes. But that's something that's taken
the immigrant
issue. But that's something that's besetting the whole of Europe. If you notice, in Poland and so on. I'm not to be discussing foreign affairs because they don't come under my purview. But I'm just expressing a view. I'm an individual who follows international activities. And so certainly you're having that wind of nationalism sweeping across, whether in the US, whether anywhere. And so all of that has to be taken into account in terms of attitudes that would be built up. And I think this is something that, again, the Windrush experience may have brought home to Britain a new realization, because having significant numbers, 50,000 persons, they think perhaps we may not have a significant number of our nationals, but certainly other Caribbean countries would have significant numbers who would be affected. And it's the more senior citizens who are now being affected, and the younger ones, because sometimes they encounter difficulty even in re-entering the UK. They're giving them a time frame, telling them you can come for 6 months, but you have to, So all of these things, I don't think there had been that realization of what the issues were.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I wondered if you could give an overview of the discussion that was had on sea transportation.
Yes.
Because now we are talking about CSME and reintegration and so on. And it's always been baffling that we take so much scourge from LIAT because there are no other forms of transportation. And in the Caribbean, so small, you can stay here and spit on Nevis and Mountstrat and see Census Station. It's always been difficult to imagine why there hasn't been more sea transportation. And I think you did mention that the ECCB pioneered sea transportation, and that has been unsuccessful. And perhaps they're thinking of trying again.
Yes.
Could you give us an overview of what has been discussed in that area?
Certainly. I, first of all, would disassociate myself from the expression that you used about what might happen from here to Nevis. We have to find some we have to find some other reference. But the question of sea transportation, air transportation has proven difficult. I saw a release just this morning that 3 entities, airline entities, had joined forces, Antillian Airways, LIAT, and Winair, in terms of coordinating their travel arrangements. And so that might be a move in the right direction. But air transportation has always been bogged down because they claim that the taxes are what make it prohibitive. And so that, that that's why the fares are so high. And persons may be more inclined to travel to North America than to go to another Caribbean island. So there has been a decrease in intra-regional travel. And that could be enhanced if you had sea travel, because you need transportation for whether it's produce, whether it's anything else, and for people. In the Windwards, they have an advantage in terms of having connections with Martinique and Guadeloupe. And the French provide some ferries that are fast, and they go between St. Lucia and Martinique, and they provide quite a bit of assistance. But up here, up north, we do not have that facility. And further down, you need it also. So I think we need to encourage the central bank through this company that it had formed to get back on board with the issue of the sea transportation and to see how one could put into place something that would foster regional integration. Because I think that's the way to go. Because we're just short distances, and by all means, you see how the ferry services here have grown over the years, and they have enhanced the cooperation and collaboration between the two islands. And so similarly, that on an expanded basis could provide the means of transportation. Just one other thing that I should mention, just reverting to the issue of post-hurricane. We had a very interesting presentation or discussion on insurance, because insurance rates are increasing as a result of hurricane damage. And the question about how do you deal with the reinsurers, which is where the real problem is. It's the reinsurers who are out there who are carrying up their rates. And so therefore, the question needs to be that you have to dialogue with the insurers to be able to keep it. Otherwise, persons will not be able to afford insurance. Governments over the years have always self-insured in terms of not taking out public insurance on buildings and saying, well, in the event of damage, we'll have to repair. But citizens perhaps can't afford that because that risk. So the question of insurance is also something that's critical.
Governor General, my other question has to do with the discussion about youth in the Caribbean. Several countries, youth unemployment, 40%, 50%. Some youth are doing extremely well, and we're very proud of them, but there are quite a number who seem to be struggling to find their way. What came out of the discussions about the youth? What else can we say? What else can we do? Where are our areas of collaboration?
Well, we're trying, thanks very much, we're trying to see how we could collaborate, how we could join together, because it's a common issue throughout the region, and especially youth and crime. And, some issues, discussions are going on here in terms of whether it's marijuana or anything else. We have the Marijuana Commission that's presently sitting here, and determination. Some countries have moved on in terms of some breakthroughs in terms of it. But the question of youth unemployment, I think in each country, it's going to depend on developmental processes. How can you engage the youth so they can be usefully, employed, they can be usefully put into various situations. Here, the efforts that are going on are commendable with the explorers groups that are being formed to start off with younger elements and to seek to impact them. And in every jurisdiction, there's going to have to be an effort. It's again quite upsetting when you hear about the 30% and 40% unemployment in some countries. But they are going to have to make some special programs to be able to deal with it. We didn't deal with, in any depth, the question of youth and youth unemployment. We just didn't have the time. But I know that it was one of the issues that persons would be concerned about.
Was there any sort of discussion in terms of the role of governors general in upholding the Constitution, and sometimes when heads of government want to bend the Constitution and, the integrity of the governors general is really challenged?
Yes. Well, there wasn't really a need to discuss it because all of us, I think, are quite independent and resolute in our positions that we are upholders of the Constitution. So there wasn't a need for that to be discussed. That wasn't coming up as a natural issue. Nobody had a difficulty in any particular jurisdiction. Because I think, just as I've indicated, all of us are coming from experiences and not prepared to, I was a former president of the OECS Bar Association and all that sort of thing. You're not prepared to get into that sort of wrangle. And you're not supposed to, because you should be able to withstand any pressures of that sort. You have a role, you have to act in accordance with advice in many instances of the law, but you also have a role in terms of acting in accordance with your own deliberate judgment. And so these you have to exercise. So all of that, there weren't any significant pressures. We have not had that experience, okay, that one cannot rebuff if anybody tries any overture. Okay, yes. Yes, you are.
Earlier you mentioned one of the topics discussed was the costs of telecommunications.
Yes.
I was wondering, could you go into a bit more detail, and if there was any discussion about, improving internet connectivity towards the region?
No, there wasn't any discussion specifically about internet connectivity, but there was the cost of intra-regional telecommunications, the question of the cost. And fortunately, I was able to, from my position as chairman, to remind that there had been a discussion, something raised by the Minister of Telecoms of Dominica, that they were addressing the issue. This is telecoms ministers were addressing the issue of the cost, and to see how they could rationalize, roaming, for example, intra-regionally, that was a prohibitive cost. And that ministers have actually, I think, looked at some cost figures that could be effected, so that hopefully we were simply given a backup to say, yes, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. But we didn't get anybody in from the telecoms industry to speak to us. The time was much too short. Maybe that could be for the next meeting.
Governor General, what can you tell us about the World Pediatric Project?
Yes. As I said, this is something that has been carried on in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We have had several referrals. Sometimes persons have gone to, children have been referred to the visiting medical persons in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I remember that perhaps you might be able to get some more detail on it from somebody like Dr. Ian Jacobs, who is a pediatrician and who has had to refer several cases. They've come here at the time when the conference was being held. They were actually here, representatives of the group. And they do, it's a free, it's a no-cost exercise where they assist in terms of providing medical relief, especially for children with major illnesses. So it's something that needs to be publicized. The Governor General of St. Vincent is making sure that all of us were aware that this existed. Yes. Fine. Well, thank you very much then. Thank you very much. I just say thank you very much. I'm glad that I've been given this opportunity of speaking with the media, and perhaps you know where to find me if you wish any questions otherwise, that I can answer. So thank you, and I'd invite you to have some refreshment before you depart. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.